I have a cartoon. If you still have the Sunday paper from last week, if you keep things like some of us do, it's Pearls Before Swine, last Sunday. I haven't read this Sunday's yet. But in this cartoon, Pig is writing. He's got his coffee cup beside him. He says on the paper, "I do not like Kansas, Boston, or Chicago. In fact, I don't even like America." In the next frame, Rat is there and he says, "What the?" He's angry. Then he says, "Then you can get the hell out of our country, you socialist communist." And in the next frame, Rat is tossing Pig over the border, out of the country. He comes back angry. This time, Goat is sitting there with his coffee, and Goat says, "Read the title." The title is Bands I Don't Care For. Kansas, Boston, Chicago, and America. The final frame, Rat says, "Context takes far time." It does take time. And it takes patience, and it takes the willingness to listen, and it takes openness, and it takes courage, and it takes thought and time. And it takes a willingness as you gather experiences and ideas and words and thoughts, it takes a willingness to let those mix inside of you and stir inside of you and create something different within you than was before you gathered that all in. It takes time, it takes thought, it takes patience, it takes a willingness to be changed. So, given all of that, when does the contextualizing end? When are we done doing it? When can I say, okay, I've got this now, I've got it all. Now I have it all wrapped up and I can quit? When is that? Matthew gives us context today on this day that we call Easter, and we read the story from Matthew. Matthew is writing to a largely Jewish audience about the year 80 in that first century, late in the first century, so some 50 years after. And he's writing about an event in which all of the characters, except for the Romans, are Jewish. Jesus is a pain in the neck to the Jewish officials, the Judean Jewish officials in Jerusalem. They consider him dangerous because he can stir people up. He can move people, and they're afraid that he's going to cause some sort of disturbance during the Passover when the place is loaded with people. And so they collaborate with their Roman friends, not really friends, to have Jesus picked up, hauled in for questioning in our language. Now, the Romans, in this situation and lots of situations, do not care about context at all. And they don't waste any time on troublemakers. They are interested in making an example out of them. And so during the Roman time in Palestine, thousands upon thousands of people hang and die on crosses. And Jesus is one of them. And that's that, right? You kill somebody on a cross, the leader of a movement, that puts the message out, you want the same thing to happen to you? If you don't, then toe the line. Behave yourselves. Get out of here. And usually people comply. But Matthew tells us something different is happening this time. Early in the morning, on the day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week, the first day of a new week. This is an allusion to the creation story. We are beginning a new creation that's unfolding with this event, though the characters don't know it yet. It's dawn, so it's not quite night and it's not quite day. It's that transition time. It's a threshold time. And some women who have been with Jesus from the start, dear friends, beloved friends of his, come, Matthew says, to see the tomb. They don't come with spices to anoint the body, as in some of the other gospel stories. They don't come to light candles or bring teddy bears or sing hymns and create some sort of shrine. They come to see the tomb. Why? Maybe to make sure that it's still closed up and nobody has broken into it. Maybe to make sure that the guards that were posted there, the Roman guards, are still there protecting it. Maybe to make sure that this really happened. Because after a loss like they have experienced, reality becomes wobbly. And sometimes you need to revisit the place to convince yourself that this really happened. Did it really happen? You need to go to the grave. You need to go to the cemetery. You need to go to the church where the service was. You need to go to the place where it happened so that it sinks in that it's real. Or you go there hoping that it's not, that it was a dream, that you made it up, or that something is happening here, maybe, which happens to be the case. They come to the tomb. And there is an earthquake because Matthew says an angel, a messenger from God, has come and rolled the stone away. So there's a connection between rolling the stone and the earth quaking. There was an earthquake at Jesus' death. The foundations of the world are being shaken because something new is emerging. The new creation is beginning. It is beginning in this tomb. The tomb is open not to let Jesus out, but to let his beloved friends in so that they will see that he is not in this place of death, that something is happening. And the wonderful intentional irony in the story is that the guards, who represent the power of Rome, the power to end life, to kill, the power of death, become like dead men, scared to death at what's happening. And the angel then says to the women, don't be afraid. The guards are scared to death. Don't you be afraid. Come and see. You're looking for the crucified Jesus. You can see he's not here. He's been raised from the dead. Now, go and tell his friends. Go and tell the others. Hurry. And so they run to share the news. In Mark's gospel, they don't do anything. They don't say anything. They're too scared. In Luke's gospel, they go and share the word, and the men blow them off. They don't believe them. But in this gospel, in this story, the women run to share the news, and they are full of joy, and they are full of fear. And they literally run into the risen Jesus as they're making tracks away from the tomb, and he echoes the call, the admonition of the angel, don't be afraid. And they stop and they touch him so that they know it's real, so that they know he's real. This is not some ghost. This is not some story, some ethereal whispering thing. This is real. It's happening. And Jesus then tells them, go and tell the others. Go and tell my brothers that they will see me in Galilee. What was so obviously over is not. The lost are not lost forever. Failure is not failure forever. Betrayal, denial, that is only for a time. There is another chance. There is something going on here, something happening. So why in Galilee? Why not Jerusalem? Luke has them stay in Jerusalem and wait for the power to come on them. Matthew sends them to Galilee. Because in Matthew's mind, Matthew is writing 10 years after Jerusalem has been ransacked, destroyed. The Romans have wrecked it. The powers that be within, the collaborators, have turned on each other, and the place isn't worth staying in any longer. There's nothing happening there. And they had their chance, right? They had their chance to be part of this thing that Jesus was bringing in the name of God, and they refused violently. So now it comes full circle back to where it began. And that's a key. It begins anew where it started in the first place. Where is that besides Galilee? This is Matthew's setup for the emergence of the Jesus movement. It's where the church begins. But here's the thing. This story of the ending of the world and the beginning of the world, the dying and rising of creation in Jesus that is compressed into that 3-day span, is followed by a scene in Matthew where his disciples immediately go to Galilee. He meets them. Where does he meet them, you suppose? It's Matthew. It's on a mountaintop, of course. Matthew loves mountaintops. And there Jesus gives them what we call the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing. And it is this wondrous, compressed story that completes everything and begins something new. But what's in the fine print? When the 11 meet Jesus on the top of the mountain, Matthew says, they worship him, but some doubt. The women running from the tomb run full of joy and full of fear. And here you and I are. Some of us, a few of us are here. This place would be full or near to it on a Easter Sunday, at least sometimes. There's 10, 12 of us, 10 of us here today. Can't be 12. Can only have 10, only 10. You and I are here. That Great Commission still out there, not fulfilled. COVID-19 is separating us. It's a time of fear and anxiety and confusion and isolation. This is Easter. Context takes far too much time. Frederick Wellen was a surgeon, a doctor, had been in practice for years. Respected, good at what he did. And then he made a terrible blunder, a mistake in an operation. The patient did not die, but her life was altered forever. And the career path she was on, she could not follow. She had to change. Everything changed for her. And he was so racked by the guilt and remorse of this mistake, he couldn't get past it. And he was so fearful that he would do something like that again in another operation that he quit medicine altogether and exiled himself literally to an island. It was an island off the coast of Sweden where his grandparents had lived. He had grown up going to their place. Now he went there to live. He and his dog and his cat, 12 years he lives there. Even there, away from everything else, in no danger of really hurting anybody, he still is haunted by the guilt of what he did and how he messed up and how that shouldn't have happened. And guilt that is compounded by an earlier injury that he caused someone else. Years before, when he was new in his medical practice, he was in a relationship with a woman, and it was very serious, and they were moving towards marriage. And then he was offered the chance to have a fellowship in the United States for a year in medicine. And so he accepted the offer. And because they weren't married and there's no provision for her, he goes alone and she stays and waits for him to return to her. And he never does. Soon after he arrives in this country, he stops corresponding altogether. He leaves her behind. He never speaks to her or sees her again until she shows up on his island. It's winter. They're both now about 70 years old. She, it turns out, is dying of cancer. And she needs to see him before she dies. And she needs to talk to him before she dies. She needs to ask him some questions before she dies. She needs some answers. And she needs for him to take her to a place that he had described to her years before, this beautiful place that he and his father had been numerous times. And it was so beautiful in her imagination, she had to see it before she left this world. So what do you say? He couldn't say no to this dying request, could he? So they make this trip. And it's good. And it's hard. And it's challenging. And it's painful. And it's revealing. And after they visit this site that it's wintertime now, so it doesn't look at all like she imagined it, but she can still imagine what it's like in the summertime, the way he described it. Afterwards, she said, I have one more place I want to visit before you take me back to my home. Can we do that? Of course. So she guides him into this heavily wooded area and finally to this little community of houses and mobile homes and travel trailers and things that people gather there, this little community. And they pull up in front of this one little trailer, this travel trailer that's lodged there. And she has him stop, and he then gets out and goes and helps her out of the car and helps her up to the door. And when they get to the door, there's a young woman comes to the door. She's in her late 30s, pretty young woman. And she opens the door, and Elsa is the woman's name that Frederick would have married. Elsa gestures to the young woman and says, "Frederick, this is Louise. This is your daughter." And the earth shakes. There is an earthquake. And the messenger from God comes and tells them, "Don't be afraid. Come and see what has happened. See what is going on. He is not here. He's been raised. Now go tell the others that he will meet them where it all began." It begins again where it began at the start. And with that, they have this life. He has this life. Frederick has this life that is not possible. He realizes it cannot be. And like the women at the tomb, he is full of joy and fear and remorse and guilt and grief and confusion and more joy. And it is all just swirling in him, the context of this event coming together. And he doesn't know what to do with any of it. Do any of us with this? This right now is life unlike anything we have experienced, anything we've ever known. But it's Easter. Christ is risen. Even in the context of pandemic and shutdown and isolation and pain and loss, Christ is risen, and among us, the risen Christ comes to meet you where your life began and now begins anew. So hear him, hear the angel. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It is Easter. But it's going to take a little longer than 3 days this time, I think. Amen.